Testing, testing. Good morning, colleagues. I have just looked up at the program and seen that there's a thing called opening reflection. So, I don't know. I'm here. Does anybody want to reflect on yesterday while we wait for people to come in? I mean, don't feel pressure, but... No. Okay, so we'll probably start in about 5 minutes. We have apologies from Dr. Hombana. He had to return to Gauteng owing to a bereavement, but I don't have any more details. But anyway, we will start in around 5 minutes. Ah, yes, that one. That would have been interesting.
Maybe we could just talk a little bit about that. I'm a data scientist in my other life. And the issue of AI is quite a big topic, and it's an exciting topic, but it's also very dangerous terrain
Yeah.
to enter. So I was going to ask him in relation to the biblical text, but also from the point of view of both academic work and forensic investigations, for example. The whole issue of the integrity of the data that you are using,
Mm-hmm.
and the ability, for example, in forensic work of the data to
Excuse me.
sorry, the ability of the data to make it through the course.
Mm.
I receive, I'm now sitting with a petabyte of data in the commission, the Venezuela commission, and that's 500 billion pages, printed pages of data on corruption. And this is going to take people to jail.
Yeah.
So we've got to prove that every piece of data that we are using is a legitimate version of the original.
Yeah.
So my question was, Scripture has been around for so long, so many years. What is the original version? For example, if somebody took us to jail for some part of the Bible that we've used against them, what are the chances of making sure that we could prove that the version of the Bible that we used to investigate these people is a legitimate version of the? I mean, that's just but more importantly, AI has a mind of its own. There's what you tell it, and that's what it decides to do. You can give it data. You've got to be able to have knowledge yourself
Yeah.
of that data and its history, for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to, if you're asking it to analyze something for you, you have to be able to check it out whether it analyzed the correct data. It didn't dream up some data of its own.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to have some knowledge of linear algebra as a tool.
Yeah.
To be able to have the long way of proving the point.
Okay.
So essentially it is absolutely powerful in giving you answers just like that.
Yeah.
Okay, the difficulty is how legitimate are the answers?
I know I discovered AI hallucinations last year sometime when I asked it about the work of Professor Steve DeGruchy, and I got a completely fake book that he was supposed to have written. And about your other question about whether we can, people can get off from conviction on Bible data. If some of the presentations I saw at the NTSSA last year are a guide, I think people will be able to, will try to prove that almost anything was added later, because I mean they were cutting the Bible down by about half, you know, and saying most of it was interpolation. So that was an interesting. Right. Does anybody want to respond now, or shall we move on to our keynote?
May I just add to what Prof. Mosala said in a slightly different way? I came across a scholar, an American scholar, at a conference many years ago on translation stuff, and he was doing his PhD on what is the Bible we read. And he was focusing on people using electronic texts, on their phones or tablets or whatever. And he asked them for permission to put a little app on their device that would document what the Bible was that they were reading. It was a terrifying experience, because you realize that with a paper Bible, right, or sort of old codex, you're aware of what you're not reading. Yes. You flip through to Lamentations, and you're aware there's stuff before it and stuff after it. In an electronic Bible, you have no awareness of what you're not reading. And he was focusing on that, and then interviewing each of these people afterwards and saying, so in your own mind, are you reading the Bible? And they were all convinced they were reading the Bible, whereas in fact it was something like 15%. Yeah. So anyway, he by now I'm sure he's finished his PhD, and it would make a really interesting book or article or something.
Yeah, am I on? Yes, if I can recommend someone who's doing interesting work, partly in terms, especially since Professor Farisani seems to have disappeared on us, there's a man called Dan McClellan who works on quite a lot on the Pentateuch, but he has a podcast and a YouTube channel called Data Over Dogma, and he analyzes and replies to people presenting Bible forming, as he says, the dogma, and he tries to counteract this with data. So if you are interested, this podcast, Data Over Dogma, you could find interesting stuff which is happening electronically. Professor Farisani, are you ready? Our comrade and friend, Professor Eladwani Farisani. On a personal note, we were just reminiscing that we both got our PhDs around a quarter of a century ago, both ably assisted by Professor West and Professor Draper. So according to the bio he sent, Professor Farisani is a Hebrew Bible scholar. His PhD was on Ezra Nehemiah, reading it against the grain. He's published journal articles and book chapters on African biblical hermeneutics. He's a full professor in the Department of Biblical Ancient Studies at UNISA. His current research focuses on the interface on disease and healing from the biblical, medical, and Chifenda cultural perspectives, using decolonial methodology. He's also involved in the New Chivenda Bible translation. So let us welcome our keynote speaker, Eladwani Farisani. Yeah, it's ready for
I want to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of the Mosala Symposium for inviting me once more to reflect this morning on Gerard West's hermeneutics. I think I would just like, two anecdotes. Otherwise, I could possibly write another paper, about Gerard and myself, Billy, Semtesta, and Paul de Kock, and everyone else. Gerard West did not only supervise Sarajaninada, Kitoko, Kato, and others. He also supervised me in reading the Ezra Nehemiah text against the Grey. When he was head of the School of Theology, in line with his participatory model of reading the Bible, he brought into the school executive voices of marginalized contract staff members who were largely black at the time to play a critical role in the affairs of the school, which was a significant departure from how the other heads were handling matters. Gerard West, together with a few senior colleagues, have traveled all the way to Hamadodonga, to Limpopo, in a Mercedes, driving a Mercedes, for our wedding, Dorothy and myself's wedding. And yesterday we were talking about it with Sarojini, who unfortunately could not be here at the moment because she's got a council meeting. But we were just talking about that trip. When I started as a young scholar, I knew already that I needed to be involved in a lot of committees and know the university rules and know how the university functions in order to survive. When Gerard West was head of school, I think I was the undergraduate coordinator, and he created space for me to do my work and others, and then later on I became the coordinator of the higher degrees, and a very important committee, and of course the undergraduate. So we come a long way, and so when Prof. Ramantswana came to my office to first talk to me about the development of a module, and then later on to ask me to talk here this week, I gladly accepted. Now, let's leave all of that. What are we talking about today, and why are we here? I want to reflect on the relevance of liberation theology post-1994. Why are we still talking about liberation theology post-1994, 32 years down the line? In line with Gerard West's dialogical methodological approach to biblical text, I would like to bring together 3 scholars in dialogue to assist us in answering the question of the relevance of liberation theology post-1994. These scholars are Gustavo Gutierrez, Tawa, Comrade Mosala, and Comrade Gerard West. So I'm going to bring you in dialogue this morning. My presentation will have the following sections. 1, I want to look at liberation according to these three scholars. I want to slot in the aspect of praxis. I want us to look at how Gutierrez, Mosala, and West view praxis. This will be a three-way synthesis. Thirdly, I want to look at liberation after apartheid, if there is such a thing as liberation, and why the question persists. Fourthly, I want to offer 4 critiques of Gerald West's hermeneutics, and then few concluding remarks. Let's start at the beginning. Gerald West stands as one of the most influential figures in South African biblical hermeneutics. Chairperson, you may only start counting now. You know, yeah. So it's yeah. Thank you very much. I would like you for not counting. I can't come all the way to be stopped. But anyway, okay. Gerald West stands as one of the most influential figures in South African biblical hermeneutics, particularly through his sustained commitment to socially engaged interpretation of Scripture. His work reflects a significant intellectual and methodological journey toward contextual theology. His journey represents maturation within a broader hermeneutical ecology shaped by post-apartheid realities, grassroots biblical reading practices, and critical self-reflection. West's hermeneutical journey reflects a profound commitment to letting the Bible speak within lived struggle while refusing simplistic or authoritative interpretations. By insisting that theology be done with those on the margins, West offers a model of biblical interpretation that is ethically responsive, methodologically robust, and deeply contextual. In a global context still marked by inequality and exclusion, his hermeneutics remains both urgent and instructive. Gerald West and Itumeleng Mosala are 2 of the most significant South African biblical scholars shaped by the struggle against apartheid. Both share a deep suspicion of supposedly neutral biblical interpretation. Yet their approaches diverge sharply in how they understand the Bible itself, the role of ideology, and the agency of ordinary readers. While Mosala advances a rigorously historical, materialistic, and ideological critique of Scripture, West moves towards a dialogical, participatory, and contextual hermeneutic. These differences result in contrasting answers to a fundamental question: where is liberation located? In the text, behind the text, or in the reading process? So I try to locate them there, but so I removed that because I don't have time. So yeah. Now, our first section. Liberation according to Gustavo Gutierrez, Itumeleng Mosala, and Gerald West. All 3 of them relate to liberation as the non-negotiable horizon of theology and biblical interpretation. But each articulates liberation at a different level of analysis and practice. Together, they show that liberation is ethical, critical, and practical. Gutierrez. According to Gutierrez, liberation, he sees liberation as the goal and starting point of theology. For Gutierrez, liberation is fundamentally a historical process of salvation that includes, but is not limited to, spiritual redemption. Liberation addresses material poverty, political oppression, and social exclusion, which he understands as forms of structural sin. How liberation functions according to Gutierrez. Liberation is the goal of theology. In other words, faith seeks the transformation of unjust social structures. Liberation is also the starting point. Namely, theology is critical reflection on practice already committed to the poor. Liberation is holistic. In other words, it addresses economic, political, cultural, and spiritual aspects. Gutierrez, therefore, anchors liberation in Christian discipleship and solidarity. To know God is to participate in the struggle for justice. Interpretation and theology are judged by whether they align with and deepen commitment to the poor. In short, liberation for Gutierrez is the theological horizon, the reason theology exists at all. Now, for Mosala, the focus for liberation, or he sees liberation as ideological and material struggle. Itumeleng Mosala radicalizes the notion of liberation by insisting that oppression, and therefore liberation, must be analyzed in terms of material conditions and class struggle, not merely moral concerns. How liberation functions according to Mosala. Liberation is historical and material, rooted in struggles over land, labor, and power. For him, liberation requires ideological critique, including critique of the Bible itself. The biblical text is a site of struggle, not an innocent witness to liberation. For Mosala, liberation means refusing to use scripture in ways that legitimize domination. Some biblical texts emerge from elite interests and must be resisted or reread against from the perspective of contemporary struggles of the exploited. In short, liberation from Mosala is the criteria of truth that authorizes resistance, even resistance to scripture when it aligns with oppression. For West, liberation is seen as participatory and transformative practice. Gerald West translates liberation theology and ideology critique into a hermeneutical practice, especially through the contextual Bible study. How does liberation functions according to West? Liberation happens through interpretation itself, not only after it. Liberation is communal and participatory. Ordinary readers are co-interpreters. Liberation is practical and interactive. Interpretation leads to action, which leads to further interpretation. West assumes that liberation cannot occur without people actively making meaning of scripture in their own context of struggle. Liberation is not handed down from theologians. It emerges through collective action and reflection. In short, for West, is the process and outcome of communal interpretive praxis. How do they fit together? Dimension of liberation, thinker, and contribution. For Gutierrez, the dimension of liberation is ethical, theological. And this contribution is why liberation is central to Christian faith. For Mosala, the dimension of liberation is critical, analytical. His contribution is how liberation exposes ideology in text and society. For West, the dimension of liberation is practical, hermeneutical. His contribution is how liberation is enacted in lived interpretations. You can think of it as a movement. 3, for Gutierrez, commitment. Choose the side of the oppressed. For Mosala, critique. Unmask domination, even in scripture. For West, practice. Read, act, and reread towards transformation. Now, Gutierrez grounds liberation theologically. Thank you. Mosala secures it critically by exposing ideology, and West embodies it hermeneutically through participatory praxis. Together, they show that liberation is not only the aim of theology, but its method and measure. Now, the question of praxis. Let's look at praxis in Gutierrez, in Mosala, and West, a three-way synthesis. Although Gustavo Gutierrez, Itumeleng Mosala, and Gerald West all locate praxis at the heart of liberation interpretation, they do so at different levels of theological reflection and with distinct methodological priorities. Taken together, they represent three complementary moments of liberation hermeneutics: theological grounding, Gutierrez; ideological critique, Mosala; and interpretive practice, West. Gutierrez, a praxis as the theological starting point. Gutierrez introduces praxis into modern theology by redefining theology itself as, I quote, critical reflection on praxis in light of the Word of God, close quotation. For him, praxis signifies concrete historical commitment to the liberation of the poor from structural injustice. Theology does not initiate this commitment. Rather, it reflects on a prior decision to stand with the oppressed. In this framework, praxis is ethical and sociopolitical action. The poor are the privileged interlocutors of theology. The truth of theology is judged by its fidelity to liberation. Gutierrez therefore establishes praxis as an epistemological priority. One comes to know God not first by interpretation, but by participation in liberative struggle. However, he does not focus primarily on how biblical texts are read at grassroots level. The interpretive task often remains with trained theologians. For Mosala, praxis is ideological and material struggle. Mosala radicalizes liberation praxis by relocating it within Marxist historical materialism and ideological criticism. For him, praxis is not merely solidarity with the poor, but class struggle rooted in material conditions of production, both in contemporary society and within the biblical text itself. Key features of Mosala's praxis include: 1, praxis as a struggle between competing class interests; 2, the biblical text as an ideological product often reflecting elite domination; 3, liberation requiring interpretation against dominant biblical voices. Where Gutierrez foregrounds commitment and West foregrounds dialogue, Mosala foregrounds suspicion. Praxis authorizes the interpreter to judge the text, distinguishing between texts or textual layers that serve ruling class interests and those that resonate with struggles of the oppressed. Mosala thus protects liberation hermeneutics from naive theological optimism. For West, praxis is a hermeneutical method and communal practice. West synthesizes and reconfigures insights from both Gutierrez and Mosala by translating praxis into an interpretive methodology, most notably contextual Bible study. For West, 3 things. 1, praxis is an action reflection cycle embedded in interpretation itself. Meaning emerges through dialogue between ordinary readers, scholars, the text, and context. Liberation is pursued with communities rather than for them. Unlike Gutierrez, West does not treat praxis mainly as a pre-theological commitment. Instead, praxis becomes the space in which interpretation happens. West therefore shifts the question from what is the correct ideology to what interpretations enable transformative practice in this community. Complementary roles of praxis for the 3 scholars. Seen together, the 3 thinkers can be understood as addressing different problems within liberation hermeneutics. Gutierrez answers the question, why must theology begin with praxis rather than doctrine? Mosala answers the question, how does ideology distort both text and interpretations? West answers the question, how can communities read the Bible in a liberative way? Rather than choosing between them, a robust liberation hermeneutic can integrate all 3. Gutierrez provides the theological orientation. Mosala provides the critical safeguards. West provides the practical methodology. Okay, I'm going to leave the table. The concluding remarks on the praxis aspect. In synthesis, Gutierrez makes praxis the starting point of theology. Mosala makes praxis the criterion for judging ideology. And West makes praxis the method of interpretation itself. Together they map a trajectory from commitment through critique to communal transformation. Any contemporary African liberation hermeneutic that seeks to be faithful will need all three moments: ethical grounding, ideological vigilance, and participatory praxis. Now, the last question. Liberation after apartheid. Why the question persists? And why are we here? Why are we still talking about the work of Gerald West and Gustavo Gutierrez and Itumeleng Mosala? The end of apartheid in 1994 marked a decisive political shift in South Africa, but it did not bring full liberation. Post-apartheid society continues to be shaped by deep economic inequality, persistent racialized poverty, land dispossession and unresolved restitution, labor, precarity and unemployment, gender-based violence, disillusionment with political elites and democratic institutions, rampant corruption. In this context, liberation can no longer be framed simply as freedom from apartheid laws. Instead, it must address structural, economic, and cultural continuities of oppression. This is precisely where Gutierrez, Mosala, and West remain profoundly relevant, each offering a distinctive way of understanding liberation after formal political emancipation. Gutierrez and post-apartheid South Africa, liberation beyond political freedom. Applied to post-apartheid Africa, Gutierrez theology exposes the illusion that political liberation automatically brings social salvation. Concrete relevance of Gutierrez. The poor remain poor despite liberation credentials. Democracy coexists with mass unemployment and informal settlements. Faith communities struggle to articulate hope amid economic exclusion. Gutierrez's insistence that liberation is multidimensional, economic, social, political, and spiritual, helps to explain why post-apartheid South Africa can be politically free yet socially bound. His concept of structural sin names the persistence of injustice embedded in economic systems, markets, and global capitalism. In practice, Gutierrez challenges South African theologians and churches to do three things. One, to move beyond reconciliation rhetoric. Two, to recommit to the poor as historical agents of God's action. Three, to evaluate theology by its impact on lived conditions. In summary, according to Gutierrez, liberation here is unfinished, and theology must remain aligned with struggles for material justice, not mere nation-building narratives. Mosala and post-apartheid South Africa. Liberation as ongoing class struggle. In post-apartheid setting, Mosala's contribution becomes even sharper. While apartheid racial domination has ended, economic domination has intensified, often under a black political elite. Concrete relevance for Mosala's theology. One, wealth remains concentrated in a small elite. Land ownership patterns are largely unchanged. Three, the Bible is often used to legitimize order, whether in the church or outside the church, patience and obedience. Mosala's insistence that liberation must be analyzed in class terms is crucial for understanding why post-apartheid South Africa has not delivered justice to the majority. His warning is clear. Political freedom without economic transformation reproduces domination in new forms. Applied Practically, Mosala helps to explain why reconciliation theologies can become tools of ideological control. He exposes how scripture can be mobilized to sanctify neoliberalism, to moralize poverty, or to delegitimize protest. Mosala also brings to the fore how liberation requires reading against biblical texts when they align with elite or imperial interests, ancient or modern. In conclusion, for Mosala, true liberation in post-apartheid Africa or South Africa demands ideological vigilance, including suspicion towards religious language used by power. West and post-apartheid South Africa, liberation as grassroots praxis. Gerald West's work is directly shaped by and speaks into post-apartheid realities, especially the failure of elite politics and institutional theology to transform everyday life. The concrete relevance of West's theology, West's contextual Bible study emerges precisely because three things. One, communities still face poverty, violence, and exclusion. Theologies of triumph and reconciliation ring hollow. Ordinary believers want scripture to speak into lived struggle. West operationalizes liberation by three things. One, who is reading the Bible? Whose questions shape interpretation? What actions does interpretation make possible? In post-apartheid context, for West, liberation happens from below, not from policy documents. Interpretation becomes a space where communities process trauma, reclaim dignity, and imagine alternatives. Scripture becomes a resource for resistance and survival, not institutional control. In summary, West makes liberation practically accessible, especially when formal liberation has stalled or betrayed popular hopes. Reading them together in post-apartheid South Africa, the three scholars. In post-apartheid South Africa, these three thinkers address different failures of liberation. Post-apartheid challenge and the thinker. For Gutierrez, the challenge is political freedom without justice. For Mosala, the ideological misuse of the Bible and theology to perpetuate oppression and the concentration of wealth into the hands of the few. And for West, it's the theology which is disconnected from lived struggle. Together, they form a liberation trajectory. One, Gutierrez reminds theology and the church that liberation is not complete until the poor are freed from structural injustice. Mosala insists that liberation demands confrontation, confronting class power, land, wealth accumulation, ideology, and even oppressive biblical texts. West shows how liberation can be enacted daily through communal reading, action, and reflection. Finally, on them, in post-apartheid South Africa, liberation is no longer a single historical event but an ongoing struggle. Gutierrez keeps liberation theologically grounded. Mosala keeps it politically honest, and West keeps it socially alive. Together they insist that freedom without justice is incomplete. Reconciliation without economic transformation is ideological, and theology without praxis is powerless. Few critiques on Gerald West's hermeneutics. These are not necessarily my own critique, and some of them Gerald West has addressed them. I'll mention four. One, the risk of romanticizing ordinary readers. A recurring critique of Gerald West's participatory hermeneutic is that, despite his stated caution, it risks romanticizing the interpretive agency of ordinary readers. By centering marginalized communities as core interpreters, West challenges academic elitism, yet critics of his work argue that this emphasis may underestimate the extent to which popular religious consciousness is shaped by colonial theology, patriarchy, and capitalist ideology. Mosala warns that without sustained ideological critique, community readings may unintentionally reinscribe oppressive meanings already embedded in both text and context. Although West explicitly acknowledges this danger, critics question whether dialogical facilitation alone is sufficient to counteract deeply internalized forms of domination, especially where biblical literalism or prosperity theology prevails. And we know that he has addressed some of these critiques through, as his work develops, through the later writings, because some of these critiques are earlier, when he wrote in his earlier life. 2, insufficient suspicion towards the biblical text. From the perspective of ideological and post-colonial criticism, West is seen as sometimes being too conciliatory towards the biblical text itself. While he recognizes that scripture is shaped by power struggle, at times his emphasis on dialogue may, according to critics, blunt the force of critique required for texts that are structurally oppressive, particularly towards women and other marginalized groups. Post-colonial scholars argue that some biblical texts are not merely ambiguous, but function as instruments of elite, patriarchal, or imperial ideology, requiring resistance rather than conversation. Feminist scholars similarly caution that dialogical engagement with texts of terror risks normalizing textual violence if ethical judgment is suspended in the name of communal process. From this angle, West's location of liberation primarily in front of the text, but he doesn't only read the text in front of the text, may downplay the need for confrontation against the text. In his defense, we state that we may say that West is aware of these texts and does read them with a hermeneutic of suspicion. Persistent power of the scholar facilitator. Another significant critique concerns the residual power of the scholar within West's model. Although West seeks to decenter academic authority, critics observe that facilitation itself remains a form of power. The scholar typically selects the text, frames the guiding questions, and introduces critical tools. Feminist and post-colonial theorists argue that power often operates most effectively when it presents itself as neutral or procedural rather than overtly directive. From this perspective, the egalitarian ethos of contextual Bible study may obscure asymmetries of education, discourse, control, and institutional location. While West reflects critically on these dynamics, the concern remains and authority is redistributed rather than fundamentally dismantled. Now, concluding remarks. Taken together, these critiques not only of West's work, but of all the scholars that we talked about, do not negate their contribution, but instead reveal the productive tensions within liberation hermeneutics itself. Mosala's ideological suspicion guards against textual and popular naivety. Feminist scholars guard against internalized patriarchy. And post-colonial critics guard guard against imperial residue. West's hermeneutics, by contrast, guards against scholarly domination and epistemic exclusion. The critiques, therefore, function less as repudiations and more as corrective than sharpen the ethics and methodological dimensions of contextual biblical interpretation. I want to conclude by saying liberation is costly. Liberation has cost the lives of the likes of Steve Biko, Solomon Mahlangu, and others. For Gerald West, personally, the method, the contextual Bible study, cost him a lot. Some of the issues were raised yesterday, but it had a direct impact on him as a person and also as a scholar. For Tawa, when engaging with him, you see how his commitment to liberation forced him to leave his ministry there in Bloemfontein, being directed to go to Botswana, and finally go to Manchester, leaving his wife behind. So, liberation was and is still costly. We can never talk about liberation as if it is not costly. When you raise issues of liberation today, you get marginalized. You get excluded. You get vilified. But this is what we have been called upon to do. Thank you.
Well, after that performance, I'm sure many of you are speechless, but if you have got questions, please give them now. Just a quick remark. Yesterday, in fact, after this, I was listening to a podcast about the liberation of Latin America and Simon Bolivar, the liberator of Latin America. But just in connection with the whole idea of whiteness and with the idea of structures being left in place. It was, that the liberation there was for the white elite. And that they left slavery and the colonial structures in place. So while liberation happened, Gutierrez, 100 years later, had to reflect on all the liberation that had not happened. And at least it's not 100 years later that we are thinking. It's only 30 years. Good. So, colleagues, questions for our presenter? I see that you are speechless. Well, maybe I will take this opportunity. I was interested to see that you are going back to liberation theology and to Gutierrez, where the current fashion is for the secular decolonial scholars from Latin America. So could you talk to us about why you were selecting Gutierrez rather than going with the fashion?
Thank you very much. When you introduced me, you said that my own research, which brings in dialogue the African context, specifically the Chivenda culture, the biblical text, and medical science, uses decoloniality methodology. And I've read a lot, apparently, about medical science, and I'm into health issues, you know. And I have engaged, so I can have an engagement with someone who is in the medical field, you know. And so it's not like I'm going back to Gutierrez and to liberation hermeneutics. Liberation, it's what we live, it's what we breathe, you know. Liberation, it's what we think of, and our thinking should be framed around liberation, you know. All the theologies brought together, if their role and responsibility is not to free us from the shackles of oppression, then let's throw them away. If all the liberations do not help us to, well, I'm a Lutheran, you see. Luther says salvation must address your intellect and your heart. So, so you need to understand. You need to understand what you are doing. You know, all these methods are not innocent. Okay, and Tawa teaches us to be suspicious of everything, and even of ourselves. Tawa was very pointed at critiquing his own colleagues in the black theology. You know, he told them that what you are doing, now I don't understand what you are doing. You know, are you still black theologians? What you are doing is outside the realms of black theology. So you see, theology is not something that you think of and then you practice it in a certain context. And this is where we are. And this is what the problem is. Because you see, the people who fought for liberation previously, they think that they have arrived. And look at the rampant corruption. Look at what is happening today. This problem, I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, when I come to Maritzburg, I look at the city when I'm driving. Look at the potholes. Look at the infrastructure decay. Okay? So if you tell me Mosala's hermeneutics and Gerald West, CBS, and Gutierrez option for the poor, it's something which we learned long time ago and which does not have relevance, then I look at you and say, well, Pela, now I want liberation here, you know, first. Heaven, I'll see it when I go there, if God does not change, you know, about those issues of liberation, you know. But you see, the other problem is, we ourselves are our own oppressors, you know. It's so sad. It's so sad to see how dictatorial, you know, and how oppressive the colleagues who have been talking about liberation theology, you know, who have been talking about black theology, who have been talking about all this. But you look at their oppression, you look at their actions. Their actions betray the theory.
Amen, brother. Preach it. Anyone else have a reflection or a question that they want to raise?
Sorry, if we can go to Dr. Zengele first.
Yeah, sure.
Then back to you.
Okay, good morning. Thank you so much for such a powerful reflection. I'm just feeling I've worked with the work of contextual theology in terms of doing CBS in communities. And it's been actually fascinating to see what's happening now. We seems to be in a, what I could name, a schizophrenic state, where what we used to do as comrades, lobbying for liberation, fighting for for justice, for a just society, there seems to be paralysis now. There's that. I would say there is a vacuum where there's like a total silence, if I can say, of challenging what's happening. We are coming from a history as liberation theologians of challenging the status quo. But can we dare to challenge the status quo today? There is a fear of, it's like, we are being betrayed. There is a lot of betrayal, but we are not vocal about it. And for me, I don't know what is that state, because it doesn't mean that we don't see, even before you can go to decoloniality and all that, let us go back from where we come from, guys. What has gone wrong? Why the paralysis? Things are going wrong, we are facing them, they're falling down, tumbling down, but we are there, as if we don't see. Did the liberation we fought for blinded us now? Or are we, I don't know, but there is that frustration in me when I look back and I'm like saying, wow, yes, we have arrived. I don't know whether we have arrived, but why is it so quiet? What's going on? I long for those days where we will liberate and engage like what's happening in this room. And I'm still feeling we are betraying, I would say we are betraying the liberation theologies and I have a dream sort of, we are not being crusaders and living what we are really preaching during the time of oppression. Yes, we are still oppressed. It's even worse now because it's nameless and we are not able to articulate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Briefly, but others can come in. Sorry, I was looking for a certain text. I wanted to read it for you, but I can't find it. You see, I think the problem is that, as you correctly say, partly, we think that we have arrived. 1, 2, we also think that Mosala and Gerald West, Gutierrez and others' theology is no longer relevant. Just look at how their theologies help us to grapple with the issues today, post 1994. The issues which they raised then, okay? But you see, and this is where we want to thank the organizers of the symposium, who help us to, hey, local is lekker, man, So let us go back. Let us go back. And there is richness. There is richness in all the theologies here. You know what I mean? You see, but the other challenge is that people like West and Tower and those who came before us, there was something in them which we need to emulate and learn from. These people were committed. They were committed to their cause, and they paid for liberation. It was not only a question of theory. Okay, practically they had to understand what does liberation mean. For me, in my context, in the context where after you baptize Winnie Mandela's grandchild, you get followed and asked, which text are you reading? A communist text, in a context where when Gerald was introducing the CBS, he became unpopular in his own faith communities, in his own personal context, And even in the theological context, you see, but he never gave up. You know, he continued. So, let us reflect. We have the resources. You know, if they did, and the good thing is that they are still here. You know, they are coming to respond, and they are coming to shake. You know, our thinking and all these things. You know, I believe that there was no. Let me put it this way. Gerald West and Mosala and Gutierrez and others, you know, they were not, if you believe in the Bible that a human being was fashioned by man. I'm not saying I believe it, so I just want to give an example. They were not fashioned, you know, by a different mud than us. Okay? So the mud that fashioned them is the same. Okay? With us. So we can do better, and we can draw from the resources which we have. You know? But the problem is the security. You see, Gunther Wittenberg used to talk about a protest against security, the politics of security. You know? So we want to secure our territory. We want to secure our job opportunities. We want to secure the ideologies of those who agree with us. We want to exclude those who don't agree with us. Okay? If anything, you know, people like to blame Zuma. You know, Zuma is not my friend, but you know who brought Zuma into the mainstream of politics and also to become deputy president? It was Mbeki. You know, Zuma was the MEC for Economic and Development Affairs here in KZN. Okay, so and Mbeki bypassed the likes of Joel Nechitenge, the likes of Paulo Jordan and other figures. He wanted somebody who would say, hey, you know. Okay, sorry, but now you see, this whole thing of wanting to be surrounded by people who will not critique you is dragging us backward.
Oh, okay. If I may be allowed just one comment on Dr. Zengele's point is, I often think that I am nostalgic for apartheid, not for the white privilege, but for the moral clarity that we had in those times, which we don't have now. Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Professor Sane, for the beautiful contribution. My question is on where would one locate your African theology of reconstruction in the whole discourse on the three scholars, and I also hear now you move towards decoloniality. Have you abandoned the reconstruction project?
Thank you. You see, the beauty of being a scholar is that you develop and you mature, you know, and when faced with different questions, you know, you don't run away, you address them. When I wrote about reconstruction, I used the book of Ezra Nehemiah with Gerald as the supervisor. But if you look at the center of what I was saying, I was reading the text against the grain. Okay? I quote a section of Mosala's ideology. I deal with ideology in reading the text against the grain. Okay? So in other words, I side with the Amharites, the people of the land, who are within the text, who have been marginalized by the ideology of the author. Okay? So I had not abandoned anything. And in doing that, I was saying, when reading the text, we need to be suspicious. So in other words, I've never abandoned the idea of being suspicious. But you see now, in the context of post-apartheid South Africa, you know, with the buzz of post-apartheid when it came, and you know how we thought that after voting, you know, we will all get houses, we will get, you know what I mean, you know, so that was the euphoria, you know what I mean, you know? And then the focus was, how do we rebuild? Okay? I believe that reconstruction is still relevant today. And it's even more relevant. Okay? But you don't abandon reading against the grave. You maintain it. But you can't maintain it while still living in the shack. You can't maintain it while you are driving on potholes. Potholes are increasing. When every day you don't have electricity supply, you know, and a whole lot of things. And those, I believe, are part of the reconstruction gear and mode. Decoloniality, I have been exposed to decoloniality, and I attended the decoloniality school many years when I was still head of school and before. I went to several of those sessions, right? Even earlier than Hurisani Ramantswana, okay? Now, Hurisani Ramantswana was smart. Thereafter, after he attended those things, then he started writing, and you know what I mean? So I'm reading, I'm still reading, and my problem is that I want perfect things, you know? I have a lot of, I can submit, if I can sit, I can submit more than 10 articles, okay? But I want perfect things, and I tend to forget that there is no, this world is not perfect, you know? Thank you very much.
Right, thank you everybody. I think we all need our tea now, so let us give our keynote speaker a great hand. I don't have the time, but perhaps if we could be back here in 15 minutes, and so that we give our other presenters the time that they need.
Thank you very much, David. You are happy that you very well.
The problem we get so busy. I didn't know you are perfect. I've got somebody who's working on medical stuff. I desperately need your work. Published with you. Oh, but you must. If you can send me your this guy is struggling.
I guess we are on South African time. Okay.
Right, colleagues, we're going to start, please. Please return to your seats. Just go.
Okay.
Your best preacher's voice.
Okay. We'd like to begin the next session by introducing our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Lerato Mokoena, who is a senior lecturer in the Old Testament unit in the Department of Biblical and Ancient Studies at UNISA. She's a prolific scholar in Old Testament studies and has recently branched into interdisciplinary studies involving philosophy and football. In this endeavor, she is writing about set pieces and football formations using Jurgen Klopp's 2018-2019 season and Jose Mourinho's 2004 Porto. She is also an advisory board member for Muscular Faith Africa, which is a European Research Council funded project at the University College London, which looks at the intersection of sports and religion in Africa. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mokoena.
I think now the gender issue has collapsed. But please don't tokenize me. Colleagues, good morning, and thank you so much. Professor Farisani, in August, I'll be marking 11 years in academia. So it's been 11 years since I was your research assistant. I have never in my career spoken on the last day of the conference. In the 11 years. I've never given the last paper, but I like the slot. I think I embrace it well. I know I wanted to take advantage of this and think that I'm just going to summarize what everyone said, but out of respect for scholarship and your time, I'm going to read what I wrote and not write on the ideas of others. Colleagues, my title was a ruse. My paper has changed significantly. I think the more I write, the more it just took a life of its own. But those are methodological tensions, right? We deal with them. My paper is not different in terms of content. It still speaks to what I wanted to speak about. So I have a very, when I was growing up, I was told often at home, hore, ke rata ditaba, meaning hore, I'm nosy, because I wanted to know everything. I want to go down every rabbit hole that I can find. So you can just imagine the kind of girlfriend I am as well, because I want to know everything. But thank God I'm surrounded by people who embrace my idiosyncrasy. So years back when I was doing philosophy, I have no formal training in the discipline. I'm simply an autodidactic scholar. I came across this idea of conceptual history of terms. Philosophy is littered with terms, with motives, with concepts, and some of them are enough to build libraries. I've read Nietzsche quite extensively, and I know with Nietzsche, he can just say the Übermensch and we build a whole library with that. Or he can say will to power and we run with that. It's a whole archive. So with my title having been said that I'm going to speak about the politics of interpretation in a contested South African context, I then ran down a rabbit hole of the conceptual history of contestations. I wanted to know, what do we mean actually by contestations? And so I began this sociological endeavor of doing a conceptual history of the term. So this is a sociological term, contestations. Contested spaces or terrains that come from a mixture of sociology, geography, political theory, labor studies, and cultural studies. At the core of the concept is a simple understanding that spaces are not neutral. It is a major Marxist theory that society is shaped by conflict, by dialectics, or tension that arises from asymmetrical relations of power, whether be in the workplace, in the city, at home, and in institutions. We know now from the magnum opus of Richard Edwards, Contested Terrains, which was written 9 years after my mother was born. She's watching, that's why I'm saying this, in 1979. So today, we know about this term and about its broader sociological foundations and formations, which was an examination of power relations within the workplace. It then further developed to Marx, to the class struggle, Gramsci, and institutions and culture as battlefields, Badiou in social fields where people compete for status and legitimacy. And in football, in the work that I'm doing now, I also argue that set pieces are also a terrain of contestation, because that is where you either lose or win a game. So they become a battlefield. And I like to use the football tactic of rest defense from the German Restverteidigung. So it's almost like counter-attacking while you're still attacking. So you commit a few players forward and then you leave some at the back. So rest defense doesn't mean that the defense is resting. You are playing, but you're playing in such a way that you prepare yourself for a counter-attack while you're doing that. So you can have your fullbacks that are inverting, your midfielders sitting in deep, but we're not here to talk about football. But you also have a university, which can also be a contested space over access and whatnot. So it is now clear that contestation as a concept unveils how spaces are not neutral. But contestation as a concept itself is not neutral. Because in a colonial settler minority state, contestation sounds politically and sociologically unfair when the notion of state and nation in itself is a contestation. Those who were born in the Bantustans will know that you were not a South African citizen until way later, but you were born in South Africa in that contested idea. When a nation is divided over political power, economic participation, land, historical legitimacy, memory, citizenship, and the meaning of nation itself, who is contesting? Contestation then, in South Africa, is not just a disagreement. It's not just dialectics. It is unfinished business. We can only contest when we have attained true freedom. Contested terrains, to me, sound like a sociological quarantine, something to keep us busy. It gives us the illusion that the playing field is leveled. On paper, it looks like we're playing with 11 men. Excuse the football innuendos. But the manager forgot that we have an ineligible player. And our lineup, it looks solid, but it's only a matter of time before Lesotho writes to FIFA for us to be sanctioned. So it's a blind spot. But I think these are contradictions that Zizek was also speaking about when he said that we feel free because sometimes we even lack the very language to articulate our own unfreedom. South Africa is not a contested terrain, it's stolen land, riddled with townships, where black men and women drop like flies. Flowers die better than them. Political power does not resolve the existential contradiction of the struggle for humanity. If we agree that empire shapes knowledge, then we will agree that the idea of a contested space is internally fractured or imbalanced in our society. Contested terrain is really just colonial anthropology, one that renames fracture without fully accounting for who engineered the ground on which the contestations are occurring. If we continue calling post-colonial societies contested terrains, we risk collapsing colonial devastation into an anthropological spectacle. Perhaps we should find other terms that we can be able to use to demonstrate how occupation continues to trigger resistance, how people can still interpret, resist, negotiate, reinterpret, and even meaning make. Because I am certain that, and I've seen it, that in post-colonial studies, contested terrains means that institutions are not ideologically seamless. Culture is not passively absorbed. Subordinate groups are not just merely victims, and that the meaning is fought over continuously. And I'm saying this because I do not want it to sound like I'm here to bash the idea of contested terrains. I'm not here to rubbish a whole archive, a body of work. And because I feel like a lot of things we do are just meaning making. So like I said, my mind goes through a lot of rabbit holes. Recently, I've been studying a lot about space explorations because we recently heard from NASA that the Voyager 2, which is an interstellar space that was launched in the 70s, which was switched off, is now busy sending messages back to Earth. And it's not supposed to do that because no command came from NASA. And as I was going down through that rabbit hole, and then I got this overview, cognitive shift, that I realized that, in space, we are just a dot. We're just a floating planet. And humanity is so confident about itself, but in the bigger scheme of things, we are quite insignificant. But then again, the philosopher in me comes with the consolation that, but it's our home. It's the only home that we know. So this is why I'm saying that I know I come with this idea that contested terrains want to flatten complexities in certain aspects, but I know that in other aspects, they are a sign that, people are continuously fighting and that people are meaning making with that rioting with their pens. So to make the example, I was just trying to show that this is a methodological tension, something that the idea of a contested terrain can be celebratory and not just abstract. And on the flip side of the coin, it peels away understated structures of modernity. So contested terrains are contested ideas. We see that. Power is structured, but it's never fully secure. So how can we speak of a contested space in South Africa where Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour? How can we speak of a shared hermeneutic even as an interpretative framework, because people can simply not even begin to imagine a black Jesus, because that will not only implicate their humanity, it will also implicate soteriology and Christology in its totality. Now, how can we even share communion at the same table? We share the same text, but not the same hermeneutics. I guess this is why people call the Bible a contested terrain. And in our case, you have two choices. It's either a state-aligned segregation theological text or a liberation document based on which existential questions you are asking. We read the same text, but we answer different existential questions. We share biblical vocabulary and not a common biblical experience. Christ inhabits two different worlds. This is not contestation. It is structured asymmetry produced by history and power. It's the hegemonic agreement the empire has with civil society. And we sign on the dotted line every day when we say that an unequal society like ours is a contested terrain. It is a hierarchy masquerading as pluralism, an architecture of exclusion, a colonial inheritance. So, colleagues, I have come to the end. So the true title of my paper is The Afterlife of Imposed Hierarchies, Between Contestations and Society Negotiations, in conversation with Gerald West and Itumeleng Mosala. I hope this paper can be an interlocutory exercise when it is published between three scholars, one a Nietzschean football theorist trained in biblical hermeneutics, another one with a contested identity, Gerald, and another one with a contested text, Tower. So like Chairman Mao says, let 1,000 flowers bloom and let 100 schools of thought contend. Gerald, thank you for your scholarship.
We were misled by the him to come forward, please? Does he know who he is? Yes.
I too was misled by the program because it says that it's supposed to be a Q&A, but it is a privilege then to introduce, I think, two guests that are going to be in a dialogue and have a panel discussion, namely Professor West and Professor Mosala, on these focus areas that we see displayed. If you cannot read there because it might not be so clear, on liberation hermeneutics, contextual Bible study, African biblical interpretation, legacy of Mosala and West. And I will read the bios that we have, and some people don't want to do this. I know it is organizing, and so please bear with me. And also, I will just read Gerald, as you said, we should call you Gerald, and not Professor West, what I was asked to read. That's going to be part of what you're going to talk about. Let me start with that first in a summary form, and then read the bio, and then I will read also the bio of Prof. Mosala. So I was speaking on the anatomy of contextual Bible study as a decolonial praxis. This paper conceptualizes contextual Bible study as a form of decolonial praxis grounded in embodied resistance of interlocking systems of domination that continue to shape African realities. Emerging from the hermeneutical trajectory of Black theology, CBS foregrounds the structural dimensions of oppression, particularly racial capitalism and its intersections with patriarchy and heteropatriarchy. HIV-related health systems, masculinities, and ecological exploitation. Drawing extensively on the work of Itumeleng Mosala, the study argues that both Black theology and CBS recognize the decisive hermeneutical role of contemporary kindred bodies in completing biblical texts marked by ideological alignment with ancient structures of domination. CBS, therefore, prioritizes a hermeneutic of contemporary reception that anticipates socio-historical and literary readings of text production. Through participatory interceptive practices, CBS renders visible the ideological absences within biblical texts while simultaneously recovering marginalized African knowledges. In this way, CBS functions as a decolonial theological methodology that resists colonizing epistemologies and advances transformative, liberation-oriented praxis. And so I don't know if Gerald West is going to do this as a presentation or part of the discussion, but let me read the bio, and then that will be part of the discussion as I understand that was supposed to be. Gerald West is a professor emeritus in the University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. He continues to work with the UKZN-based Ujamaa Center for Community Development and Research, as he has for more than 30 years, a project in which socially engaged biblical scholars and ordinary African readers of the Bible from poor, working class, and marginalized communities collaborate for social transformation. He has published extensively on the work of the Ujamaa Center. A recent publication co-authored with Ujamaa Center is Gerald O. West, Stembiso Zwane, and the elder L. Carlos in 2023. Contending for invented spaces in African context and biblical texts, intersecting gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and economics. And I will read Prof. Mosala's bio, and after that I will invite our two guests to engage us. Professor Itumeleng Mosala commenced his professional life as a teacher after completing his teacher's training in 1970. He holds a master's degree from the University of Manchester, UK, a master's in business administration from the Open University Business School in the UK, and a PhD from the University of Cape Town. He attained an associate of the Federal Theological Seminary, AFTS degree from the Federal Theological Seminary of Southern Africa in 1976. Prof. Mosala also successfully completed major modules in economics, international economics, and economic policy for a BCom degree he abandoned in academic areas such as big data, or that he abandoned at that time for lack of time. He has obtained several professional development certificates for courses he has passed from various universities in academic areas such as big data, mathematical modeling, business analytics, the data explosion, quantitative and qualitative research methods, understanding nuclear power, health data analytics, computer language, R for data science. As he said in his other life, he's a data scientist, and social media analytics, among others. His full-time career as an academic spanned the years 1980 to 2003 at the following institutions: University of Botswana, University of Cape Town, and the Technikon Northwest University, 1998 to 2003. This period was interspersed by a period as lecturer at Wesley College and Divinity Faculty, University of Cambridge in Cambridge, UK, 1991-1993. His career in the public service started as a chief director for higher education in the National Department of Education during the presidency of Nelson Mandela in 1995, September to 1998. After a stint as a vice chancellor and principal at the Technikon Northwest in 1998 to 2003, he returned to the public service as the Director General, the National Department of Arts and Culture. Professor Mosala then joined the private sector in the nuclear industry as Regional Vice President of the Westinghouse Electric Company, a global nuclear energy company, from May 2010 to January 2016. He continued to serve in the board of Westinghouse South Africa until 2019. He founded a number of successful enterprises, including financial services advisory company, still nascent ventures. Professor Mosala is a published author, social commentator, editor, and renowned speaker. He has written numerous publications and books, and he has sat on various national committees and boards. The President of the Republic, Cyril M. Ramaphosa, appointed Professor Itumeleng Mosala as a commissioner of the Independent Commission for the Remuneration of Public Office Bearers on 15 November 2019. He again was appointed as secretary, and this is the one I included, which wasn't Professor Mosala, because we talked a lot during that time and did not know that you were talking to me. But he again was appointed as the secretary of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture and corruption and fraud in the public sector, including organs of state, long name, but shortly known as the State Capture Commission, chaired by the retired Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. And so let us welcome our two legends that we're going to recognize for their work and hear from them, those who have shaped and continue to shape the thoughts Gerald West and Professor Mosala. Let's give them. Sit there, and then.
You must sit there for that mic.
Does this one not work?
No, but I think they, for the live stream, they need that mic.
Yes,
For
you
now.
can go over. Sit. Yes, you sit on the other chair.
Oh, shall I do
There's a-
Shall I do
there
it?
is-
Colleagues, comrades, what a joy to be here and how deeply honored I am. I'm overwhelmed by this. Firstly, by being associated with Professor Itumeleng Mosala, who is my mentor with a capital M. I've told stories, and I could sit here telling stories all day about him, but it was his work which he posted to me. You won't believe this. He posted this to me when I was in Sheffield in 1985 and 6 and 7. And we didn't have email in those days. These big fat parcels would arrive, all printed on a dot matrix printer, including his 1987 doctoral dissertation, which became the basis for his landmark book. And ever since then, Professor Mosala has been this mentor. He's just guided me as this well-intentioned white young man who didn't always know where he was going, and people like Professor Mosala and others disciplined me, and I use that word quite deliberately. They disciplined me to understand that whiteness was not going to be the answer. And that was, you needed, all whites need to understand that. And it was an existential experience for me, having people like Professor Mosala guiding me through what it meant to let go of whiteness and to find a way of, if summoned, serve the black struggle. And I was very fortunate to be summoned on a regular basis throughout my life by Prof. Mosala and others. So it's a great joy to be associated with Professor Mosala in this way. It's the greater honor. And then for my own work to be the subject of reflection, it's just overwhelming. And I've so appreciated all of you for your contributions, and I include the contributions over tea, where people have come up and spoken to me. So thank you for that. It's a great joy to be here. I'm going to, if I may, I haven't prepared anything deliberate. I'm going to pick up on Dr. Lerato Mokwena's notion of contestation. I think you're onto something there, my sister, and I look forward to seeing the paper. But if I wanted to say something, it would be that what I learned from Professor Mosala is that a hermeneutic, an African hermeneutic of reception requires a hermeneutic of text production. Okay? Let me say that again. A hermeneutic of reception, beginning with the reader, the black working class, right, requires the same sort of moves one makes in analyzing your context, in analyzing the biblical text, and the same kind of moves you make in analyzing the biblical text you make in analyzing the context. There's this hermeneutic of reciprocality there, actually. And I say this because I think this is really very important, because both are deeply contested. Reception is a deeply contested dimension of biblical interpretation, and text production is a deeply contested dimension of biblical studies. Now,
if you read Professor Mosala's work, he makes it clear that this is an obvious thing. If you are a biblical scholar and you cite the work of Dyston and others that have been mentioned here, it's obvious in biblical studies that texts make use of other texts which make use of other texts. Texts are regularly reused. I mean, it's obvious. What Prof. Mosala does is to ideologize that. To say, if that's true, and we all know it's true, it's axiomatic to biblical studies, what if we embrace the idea that every reuse is ideological? Every reuse of any text is ideological, right? When Matthew reuses Mark, it's ideological, okay? When Chronicles reuses Kings, it's ideological, okay? And I'm speaking in the macro stuff here. One can become very particular, as Professor Mosala has indicated. It's not only the big units in our Bible where this is true, it's true within any small text that you might want to engage. And I think this is a fundamental contribution by Professor Mosala, and we need to keep returning to it. And we need to find a way, I think, pedagogically, of enabling our students to grapple with this idea. One of the first things I used to do with my first-year students in biblical studies was to give them the South African anthem that we now use, right? And ask them to identify the components that make it up. Okay? So what you have here is a very good example of the reuse of text, right? Deeply ideological. And even, first-year students will understand, that there'll be certain parts that they won't sing, for example. Why? Because they recognize that although this is sort of a coherent text, it's a composite text whose parts are ideologically loaded. Okay. So once they've grappled with that, then you turn to the Bible and, you begin to grapple with the Bible as a contested text. And I think this is really important for us because it worries me a little, increasingly, let me say, that African biblical scholarship, and I'm now speaking generally around the continent, and of Africans living in America as well, our colleagues that live in America, tend to focus on the final form of the text. In fact, Andrew Mbuvi, who's a colleague of ours, and I've said this to Andrew, so I'm not saying anything behind his back. Andrew Mbuvi, who now, he's from Kenya, is he? Yeah, from Kenya, but lives and works in America. Andrew's written this very significant book on African biblical studies. Okay, not African biblical interpretation, African biblical studies, this emerging discipline. That's what he wants to make the argument. And issues of race, etc. It's a very, very good book. And in there somewhere, he says African biblical scholarship has a tendency to focus on the final form of the text. And I was surprised that he didn't then, at least have a footnote to Mosala or someone else, you know what I mean? I mean, even people like Justin Ukpong, the late Justin Ukpong, never accepted the final form of the text. Justin's work is full of the text as problematic, and he would use textual criticism to show the ideological ladenness of the text. And so I think that this is something we've got to not let go of. It was formative in my own biblical hermeneutics, this idea of that the hermeneutic of reception requires a hermeneutics of text production. If you look at Professor Mosala's book, that's how it's structured. He begins with the black masses and their realities as the site of reception, right? Their deeply contested realities as a site of contestation. Then he goes to the Bible, to the book of Micah, and looks at the book of Micah as a site of contestation. And I think we need to keep these two things linked. Okay, that's my first point. My second point is that we must, I think, problematize the final form of the text, both in our own work, in the work of our students, and I think in the work of the church. I don't get asked to preach very often anymore, but when I do, I never leave the text in its final form, ever. And you know what's amazing is, you know that gap between the pulpit and the door in the church, right? I wanted to write something on this, you know, the space, what our colleague Ustembiso Zwane would call the invigorated space. If it's been a good sermon, if it's not been a good sermon, it's invited space. You know, you're shaped already as to what you should think. If it's invigorated space, if you've done your job as a preacher, at the door, there's a logjam. Why? Because people are now thinking, but that, you know, I was reading my Bible when he was preaching, and now the text is now not so stable anymore, you know? And you know, people don't mind that. Who are the gatekeepers of a stable text? The clergy. Ordinary folks sitting there in the church. Their reality makes it clear the Bible is an unstable text, right? And part of our job, I think, in preaching is to destabilize the text, the final form. So those are the things I wanted just to say. And I learned both of these in engaging with Professor Mosala. And what we try to do in contextual Bible study is to do the same thing. That there's a hermeneutic of reception which recognizes the contestation. And so what we do increasingly, if you follow the trajectory of our work, is we speak of organized communities, okay? Organized communities of the poor and marginalized. Communities that already have a voice over against the scholars, the theologians, the socially engaged scholar, okay, who can speak. You're not afraid to talk back, okay. Now, in our early work, we didn't use the word organized because we didn't need to. The struggle had disciplined us. Every community that one worked with was organized. Now, that's not the case anymore, unfortunately. It's not the case anymore. And there's a vast difference in working with a loose group of HIV-positive people or working with a Siapila, organized community of people living with HIV. Complete difference. Okay. And so as the Ujoma Center, we try to focus on working with organized communities where there is already the recognition of contestation in the site of reception. And then we also try to offer, in terms of our engagement with biblical texts, a biblical text that is a site of struggle, that is contested, where the final form is destabilized quite deliberately through the contextual Bible study questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerard. It's really a privilege that I think we haven't, history hasn't given us the privilege over the time we've known each other to sit as closely physically as we've been brought to do this morning.
Except on aeroplanes.
Except on aeroplanes, yes. Yeah, and on foreign conference tables. But not here in Azania.
Yeah.
And I would like to therefore thank the department from UNISA, Ndate Ramatswane, and the colleagues. And thank the colleagues over here in KZN for making this possible, and all our colleagues who are participating from the different universities in this event here in the last 2 days. I'm most grateful, most grateful. I don't know where to start, because part of what I want to say has to do with spaces. And I'm conservative that way that I think spaces can't be written about. But I have a granddaughter who draws all kinds of things. I'm beginning to worry about what's going to happen to her English, because I'd rather she writes all kinds of things. But she communicates so very wonderfully by putting spaces either on paper or on a what's that, tablet.
Yeah, yeah.
And then things like those. The kids are something else these days. But the spaces I want to just quickly go through have to do with where I've been. As has been mentioned already, I come from Bloemfontein. I was born, in terms of birthplace, in a place called Tabanchu, 60 kilometers outside of Bloemfontein, but I brought up in Bloemfontein. My father came from Bloemfontein, my mother from Tabanchu. Now, Bloemfontein is the place where the African National Congress was formally formed. And the hall where that happened is 2 streets away from my street in Bloemfontein. There's a lot I could say about Bloemfontein and about that place, but I just want to mention a few things. The names of the streets in the township that I come from now, the township's name is 4 and 6. Now, many of you may be too young to know what 4 and 6 is. 4 and 6 is 45 cents. It's money. It's 4 and 6. It came to be 4 and 6 because of the 1922 miners' strike. And the wage demand by the mining South African black community mentioned, among other things, the need to buy a plot of land. And so the demanded wage was 4 and 6. That was the slogan of that struggle. And after that, the township came into being. And all the streets, I dare say, there may be 1 or 2, if I don't want to be too, there may be 1 or 2 that's not. All the names of the streets at 4 and 6 are the names of ANC leaders of the time. And every street has a church on it, except my street. It's the only street where there is no church. I don't know why, but it is also the first street to produce a priest. There hasn't ever, as far as I know, there are other people here who might know better now because I've been gone many years. There hasn't been a theologian also that comes out of that street. Now, these things matter to me. I'll tell you why they do. I then learned, and I won't give you the whole route of how I landed in Manchester eventually. I ended up in Manchester after I had been a young probationer minister in Bloemfontein, and I told the comrades in conversations here that I went with my senior minister to a place called Brantford at the time when Winnie Mandela was, I don't know what the term is, was banished to Brantford. And as you know, she was a Methodist. And we baptized kids there. And one of the children I baptized was one of the granddaughters of Winnie, and I don't know which one of them because others I met as students at UCT when I was teaching there already. But as I baptized that kid, the police were surrounding us. They wanted to actually see whether this was a baptism or not. And that space has never gone out of my mind and heart. After that, I attended a conference in Umtata. It was a conference of the Interdenominational African Ministers of Religion. It was a big conference. Before I went there, I got visited by the special branch, the security police, who reminded, or didn't remind me, I didn't really know them. They said they are the ones that attended the baptism in Brantford when I went there, and said to me that they also know that I'm going to Mthatha in the Eastern Cape for a conference. And they just said to me nicely that you will not see us, but we will be there. And so I went to Mthatha, and in Mthatha I met with Steve. I was meeting with him, Steve Biko, and I was meeting with him for the first time, Steve Biko and Randwesi, Randwesi's surname, Nengwenkulu, who survived many attempts in Botswana when we lived in Botswana with him. Many, many attempts. We lived in the same street. But for some reason, when the South African Defence Force came to kill people, it killed people in the middle. He stays right at the back of the street, as I was right in the front of the street. I don't know whether they were too much in a hurry and passed my house, but I'm glad. Whatever the reason, I'm glad. I wouldn't be here today. But I met Steve and Nengwenkulu in Umthatha. And I asked them what they were doing there, because I thought them and me, okay, I have a justification, I'm a minister. I asked them what they were doing in Umthatha. And they says the black consciousness intends to be everywhere where black people are. I left that place and went back to a small church that I was stationed at, about 19 kilometers out of Welkom in the Free State. Wesselsbron is a little space. As I parked my car at my little house, some house, a white Volkswagen car parked behind me. And it was the special branch, the security police. And it was 2 white people and 1 black person. The 1 black person, I had grown up with him. I went to the same primary school with him. We played marbles with him. He knew my family, I knew his family. I used to eat at his house, he used to eat at my house. But above all, he was part of the student movement at the University of Tefloop, University of the North, when Onkgopotse Tiro read the famous Onkgopotse Tiro speech that led to the mass uprising through campuses all over the country. And it was great to see him, because I hadn't seen him for a while. And so he said to me, you know what I do now? So I said, no, I don't. He says, no, I'm with these guys. But that's what he said to me, so I had to work that out, do a bit of hermeneutics there. And so he said to me, no, we know we're checking you, and you're fine. There's no real problem. We just drove behind you up to this point. The only thing is that we do know that you might leave the country. We're just smelling that. It sounds to us like you may leave the country. And he said to me, and we were speaking in Setswana, he said to me, actually, I think you should leave the country. Because we do have plans to arrest you, but we also have plans to kill you. So, as your friend, so I thought he was joking, and we were all playing with that. They were killing people those days. It wasn't anything surprising. People were dying those places. Steve had not yet died, but a number of people had died in police detention at that time. So, so he said that to me, and after they left, because they just left, they didn't do anything. That was the only conversation I had with them. I decided that the sooner I leave, the better. Those were my spaces inside the country. For a long time, I was then in other spaces outside the country. I landed in Manchester, the University of Manchester. And the first book that I bought in Manchester and read, it was quite by accident, really. I was very excited to be overseas, period. The Manchester part of it was like an addition, you know. But just before you arrive at the main campus on Oxford Street, Oxford Road, I can't remember Oxford Street. I mean, in London there's Oxford Street, I think. In Manchester there's Oxford Road, going down the road to the university. Just before then there's a small house over there, and it didn't take long for people to say to me, in excitement, because I was coming out of, as they saw it, out of the struggle here. They pointed out to me that this house is the house where Friedrich Engels, a companion of Karl Marx, used to live here. And that was the time when Marx was in London and was working in the British Library and produced the big tomes that we know, Das Kapital, all 3 volumes. But in that house there was a small bookshop was happening. And the first book that I bought in England was a book that I found in that house, which was called Marx and Engels on Religion. I suspect that the pivot came at that time for me. I wasn't really to know for a fact. But I read that book, some amazing articles in that book. Amazing articles. So, I can tell you a lot. I must tell you about my supervisor, who was a son of refugees from Eastern Europe. I always forget Latvia, from Latvia in Eastern Europe, with whom we had a contestation about my dissertation, because he was very, I suppose this is every scholar, every student's, So we had a contestation with my professor, because he said to me, and I say this a lot these days, because of the space where I am now, but I would never have known then. I'm talking about 1977. So he says to me, why do you want to write about justice?
Sure.
An important topic, I think, would be corruption. Do your dissertation on corruption. So I said, no. Corruption is for people who are settled.
Yeah.
You know, the struggle against corruption is an easy struggle. You are settled, you find out who's corrupt, you report them, they get arrested. I'm going to the camps when I finish here. I want to carry a gun.
Yeah.
So we fought a little bit, and I said to him, no, actually, I'm not going to write about corruption. I'm going to write about, my dissertation title was Social Justice Through Violent Revolution. And my idea was to go participate in a violent revolution. It was a difficult dissertation, but I also had there was a matter that relates to Gerard. I know he was, I don't know whether you were around, but I'm sure you must have been born by that time. I don't know, 1977.
But you were not a theologian yet at that time. But there's a matter that impacts on you and me that relates to way back then. And this is the fact that I still am a member of the Black Consciousness Movement. And one of the things that we used to say in the Black Consciousness Movement about membership, how does one become a member? So now I don't think this was actually part of our constitution, but it was a very dominant slogan in the movement that in order to be accepted as a member in this organization, you must bring a white man's head. Tlhogo ya leburu. You know. So, the Black Consciousness Movement is such a beautiful movement. There was no way BC people, Steve Biko, and the likes of us doing religions, there was no way we were going to have to get a white man's head and bring it over as membership. But this slogan was not going away. It was not going away. So I was always thinking about how am I going to get Tlhogo ya leburu? It refused to go away from my mind, this matter. And so in the 80s, when Garrett communicated with me about my work,
I was available here.
I started thinking that, God is great. Because the least that's now happening is that there is one head that I know. I know this head, and I leave it to God how I will get this head and be able to take it to justify my membership of the Black Consciousness Party. And I was really excited. I said, no, a plan will come. So I left the matter. By that time, of course, I was already a very senior member of the Methodist Church. When we talked, and I was teaching at the University of Cape Town, and I thought, if I don't get it literally, at least I can get it theologically. But before I left Manchester, I was on my own with regards to, for this dissertation and this work I'm doing, where am I going to get the material?
Yeah.
I had no help from supervisors. They said to me, we're not going to stand on your way, but you are on your own. But that's also fine, because that was the slogan of the Black Consciousness Movement. Black person, you are on your own. So that was fine with me. So I searched and I searched and I searched and I searched, and God being God, at least those days I believed more in God than I do now, but but God being God, I came across this journal. And this journal is called Radical Religion. And it was produced, this particular volume was produced in 1975. It was, the editors of this book were Norman Gottwald and Wire.
Yeah.
Both of them were Berkeley, California.
Yeah, that's right.
At the graduate union there, which was part of the university setup. I didn't know them in person. I was still in the UK, and I started reading this thing. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I thought, how is it that I can just come across this? It's subtitled Class Origins and Class Readings. And then again, my road and my way was opening everywhere. And I read this thing and used it, and it was more than what I had bargained for. There are two articles here. I brought it here to talk about where we come from and what is this all about. and probably answering your question as well, why are we here today? There's an article here on the New Testament by John Perman Brown called Techniques of Imperial Control, the background of the gospel event. It's an incredible article, if only because it speaks to spaces in the New Testament. Because I'm an Old Testament scholar, it wasn't the first ones of the articles I read here. I looked for Old Testament articles. And in this journal, there is also an article by Jan, I don't know whether it's Das or Dus, I think it's German, D-U-S. And it's called, it's a question, Moses or Joshua? On the problem of the founder of the Israelite religion. If I had been able to tell you what it says, I would just be saying, I rest my case now. I wouldn't continue. But it is not a concluded issue as to who is it that took the Israelite out of Egypt.
Yeah.
It's not even a concluded matter as to whether the Israelites were ever in Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now we start in scholarship.
Yeah.
But it's not, I'm not in a classroom here. I'm not here to teach. I'm here to help the department that I'm now Professor Extraordinaire in it. I had never heard of that term until recently at UNISA. But the Pretoria University people must not be offended. I'm still a research professor at the University of Pretoria also. But that for me goes back to how texts have been read and interpreted over time. It took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that there's a multiplicity of texts in the Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible is not one text, and it is not one voice. There's a multiplicity of voices. I kind of caught wind of it when I left the seminary here in Pietermaritzburg. I'm one of those who spent 1 year in Alice, 1 year in Umtata, and 1 year here in Alice. By the time I left here, I knew that all my professors were wrong when they say about the Bible, this is the word of God. It wasn't possible. God is much more important than the text that people were saying is his word. But I also was a student of philosophy at the seminary. My majors were actually not Old Testament and New Testament, even though I did them throughout the 3 years. My majors were philosophy and history. So I understood what the task of theology is. And I made a distinction between theology and the Bible. Yeah. And I thought this is very important for me because I'm kind of captured. I'm a Christian, and I'm at a point at which I'm scared that I'm about to at least be declared, if I can't myself stop being a Christian, I will be declared a non-Christian. I will be thrown out soon. And I didn't want to. My mother would never forgive me for that. My father was always a problem, so I wasn't worried about him. So I already, and I'm really trying to say, well, I said it to myself sitting there this morning, that who would have known, Gerard, when we started doing the work that we are doing, who would have known that today we would be sitting here? Yeah. Who would have known that yesterday and today would have happened?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I just can't imagine. I've taught in many parts in the world. I've taught with Nengo Nkulu. In Botswana, he was the head of political science. I was the head of religious studies. We had 300 to 400 students at any point in time, none of whom were studying theology, but were taking courses in theology because of the way in which we brought theology and politics together in our lectures. We had more students than anybody else because they wanted to know. But they also want to know because this thing called the biblical text happens or tends to be almost in every home. You can't escape it. You can't even escape it in prison. For all the things that happen to you when you are there, the Bible is also there. And even when you don't want it, they impose it on you. You dare not throw it out of your cell. There's a Bible in your cell. There are two things in your cell. There's a toilet and there's a Bible. Reverend Neville Ncube, who was with me at the seminary before we were thrown out of Fort Hare and before we got here, told me about how he fought to retain his copy of the Bible. Sure. He fought, literally fought other prisoners. Because although there was a toilet, there was no toilet paper. And so all the other prisoners did the logical thing. I didn't say the right thing. And the Bible is long, you see, so people were thinking about the years of imprisonment that they are there. So they were taking one page at a time. But there comes a time when those pages come to an end. Yeah. And at that point, he still had his Bible. Sure. And now they wanted a share of his Bible for the page that was needed. And he told me, I fought. I said, I will die, not this Bible. Years later, I said to myself, he died, unfortunately, at the end of that first year I was with him at the seminary in a car accident from Durban here to Standerton, going home. I was very unhappy that when I began to argue that there are multiplicity of struggles and multiplicity of voices and multiplicity of texts in the Bible, that he was not there. I would have loved to have talked to him about that. Because in my view, his fight and his refusal was another text.
Yes. Yeah.
And you only understand the biblical text if you're coming from a text yourself. Yeah. And you only interpret it correctly if you use your text to interpret the other text, the text of the Bible. Of course, the text will interpret you also, because the text is alive as well. But over the years, I haven't been able to win the struggle. I'm very surprised about what I heard people say here. Yeah. I didn't know that you actually knew even the things that I was still supposed to still try to know. And I sat here in the last 2 days thinking, my goodness, that's true. I didn't quite say that he says. But actually, I was going to say that. And so the struggle continued. And this is what it's all about. When we talk about theology and the theology of liberation, we're not talking about something that has been frozen inside of Mosala's books. Yeah. We're talking the life of struggle and the life of embracing the sort of things that, speaking as a theologian, God would want us to embrace. And so I keep hearing people, even those that I've spoken to them, misrepresenting the Bible. Yeah. I must confess, I don't go to church. I go to church when I'm invited. But I'm not going to sit there, especially my church, it hasn't got the time understanding, my church. We're supposed by law at the Methodist Church to do 1 hour on Sunday. But my wife goes to church, she leaves in the morning early, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she's still not back. And so, in view of the fact that there's so much misinterpretation, misuse, and misabuse of the Bible, I just can't sit there and wait to see it happen. I really can't. I'd rather be in the classroom where I'm the only one talking. So I've been trying other things to try and promote the struggle. The struggle that I was so amazed to hear you. You are so ahead of the... I mean, I'm saying amen to those things. I never got to them. I never had the time to get to them. But before I forgot, the one space before I get to the last space, because I can also go on forever like those preachers in the church. I then receive a call from Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice at the time, Zondo, to ask me to come and help him at the commission, to run the commission as a secretary of the commission and support him with the commission. And I was so taken aback that I was being asked to do that. I was very, very honored and very humbled by that. But I also was worried, how does he know me and where does he know me from? You can't avoid to do that when you are a hermeneutician. So I started doing biblical hermeneutics on him. Where does he know me from?
Yeah.
Of course, I had known him and met him, and he didn't know, and I left that to the end when we were about to finish the commission to tell him about it. When I was country president of the nuclear energy company that was mentioned here, and we had to go to court all the way through to the Constitutional Court because people had stolen our tender. We had a $4 billion US tender that was stolen. And we tried to defend that, ended up in the Constitutional Court. But I didn't tell him about that. I worked with him. The key issue at the beginning was corruption, that I had refused to write a dissertation on corruption. And now, years later, I have to come and supervise corruption busting in a major, what's it called? But I said, you know, God is strange in the sense that God does God's things the way God does things. So that happened, and I can tell you that's a place where tears just roll down. It's a difficult place. I'm glad that the commission is finished. I'm still working for the commission, but in the Department of Justice, I'm just dealing with data there. But that was a difficult place. The first day, very first day, my first day in my office at the commission, I got a call from a friend of mine. Actually, I must say, from a comrade, who said to me, "What's happening? Where are you?" So I say, "I'm in Joburg." "What do you mean?" He says, "Where in Joburg?" So I said, I told him the suburb in Johannesburg where I was. He says, "What are you doing?" So before I said anything, he says, I've got a letter here from you. It's a summons. But you know me. You know that I've not done anything. I'm just being asked to provide some information. So I said, no, I definitely know you. But let's talk about other things. I said, this is just too early for me.
Yeah.
And throughout that period, as I had sight of things and sight of people's things and sight of things that have happened, it was a very difficult time for me. I was really honored, but it was a very difficult time for me. And then, of course, we finished the report. So we had a moment where I was supposed to send the last volume of the report to the president. And the staff were helping us to finalize that last report, and we had to send it before midnight. Because if we didn't, we would have to go to court to ask for an extension for the commission. So we were worried that we might not be quite finished. We really were pushing people. We pushed them. And we pushed them and they finished. Gave it to us, and we're not going to read anything. It must go. We pressed and it went. But while we were waiting, just before we do this, I asked him, Chief Justice, how did you know about me? Where did you find out about me? And he just laughed at me. He had a big laughter, just laughed at me. He says, no, I know you. Even when I was a student, he says, you were president of Hazapo at the time, and I was a student at Zululand University. And then we just laughed. The other things I can't talk to you about, because we talked about the things, and I can't talk about those things. But you see, because I'm going to accuse you, colleagues, as well, as I finish off. You also refuse to read the Bible. I'm begging for loyalty and honesty and for love for the Bible. Please read it the way it's written. Don't let some preacher tell you this is the word of God. It's not up to you to make it the word of God. It already is. This is a terrain of struggle. It's a contestation space, Dr. Lerato. Now, I don't know whether it was meant to be like that, but because people were fighting about which part is the right God that God is speaking through. Yours or my part. Otherwise, what Professor Mchisela was taking us through yesterday would not be there. If we just listen to the exegesis and hermeneutical exercise he took us through yesterday about that Exodus, the Moses thing, and the suspicion he warned us about, that we must be careful. I'm pleading that we be careful. There's enough that is too important in here to be allowed, for you to be allowed to abuse it. And so scholars' job is to generate the tools, to arm the people. Me, I was armed to bring Tlhogo Leburu. You know, and I delivered on it. It may not have been a literal one. I know this one is still sitting here, but but I delivered on the Tlhogo Leburu. But I also realized that we are weak. And so in the last few years, I've been involved in statistics and data science and stuff like that. And I went back to this book. This is the last page. It was the second book I bought in Manchester in 1977. This is a newer version of it. The old one, students stole it. You know, students steal, no? And I'll tell you, I can tell you my honors dissertation I was telling you about students stole, because it was the only copy I had. I typed it myself, and I didn't have another copy. They stole it at UCT. If it's not them, it must be the lecturers. I don't know who stole it, but stole it. So the oldest, the first version I had of this thing, I bought in 1977. And this book is copyrighted 1954.
Sure.
Now, if you are in the social sciences in Manchester, this was the first book that was prescribed to you. It's called How to Lie with Statistics. It's very important to know how to lie with statistics. And you can't read the Bible when you don't understand or don't have the tools for identifying how people lie. It says statistics. Statistics is a language. For me, in relation to what we were talking about, and that's why I pulled it out yesterday when I was coming, the other day when I was coming here. The most important chapter is the first chapter. And that chapter talks about the built-in bias. It talks about the sample with the built-in bias. Now I'm trying for the last time, but I think you're so much ahead of me. I'm just being arrogant when I'm saying I'm trying you guys for the last time. That if you do not, when you just pick up the text, and you do not, as you choose a text, start by asking yourself, okay, this chapter is a sample with a built-in bias for which real chapter that exists somewhere where I don't know. That's my contribution to the debate that happened here in honor of you, Prof. There is a built-in bias. The various texts, the various chapters, the various epicopes, I think we used to call them pericopes, we used to call them. Each one of them is a sample with a built-in bias. Your job, now there's nothing wrong with the text as a text. The text doesn't owe you anything. But it is your job as an interpreter and reader to wrangle with it. That's the word we use in data science. You wrangle with the data, you wrangle, you fight with it until you can determine the sample that is a legitimate representative of the truth. The sample itself is not the truth. The world of that text exists somewhere. An exegete and a hermeneutician must struggle all the time. In fact, you can struggle one time. When you come back next to that text, you must struggle again. Because that's how statistics works. You work with multiple samples until you find the standard error, the standard deviation of the total universe of the data you are dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you.
the chairing of the next session is a contested space. Could I make a request to Professor Mosala? That journal, is it possible that you could...
I suppose we'll now take
Sorry,
questions.
sorry, just still a question.
I apologize. I just was requesting that you perhaps can have that journal scanned.
No, it's not necessary to go that route. There is a book that was subsequently published.
Okay.
And I think the title is it's still by Norman Gottwald. So if you do it on Google Scholar, if you just go for Norman Gottwald, you will find it. I used to have a copy.
Yes.
And I made the mistake when Gottwald came here.
Yes.
The year that he came here, I made a mistake of taking him for an interview on Metro Radio one morning, and the what do you call them? The guy who was hosting us there, the host, asked us to give him something that he can look at to be able to introduce him. And my book went forever. Yeah. Even the SABC, well, I don't know whether it's SABC Metro.
Yeah.
He's a friend of mine, but he can't find the book. But the book is published. It's very much available. But you can take the other details. I'll give you the title before we leave here. Yeah.
Now the questions and comments and whatever engagement. Prof, looks like you have something to say. Please do.
So much, yeah. Tell us
Please do. Professor Nada.
I need to gather my thoughts.
Oh, you still gather your thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you. Brilliant. You have my head forever. Brilliant.
The truth is not finished. So you mustn't hold back.
No.
The struggle continues.
Yes.
Yes, it's a bit of a personal question for me. And going back to Professor Nada's opening keynote, perhaps you could, and your thing about getting white heads.
Yeah.
Could you talk about if you got a new white head now, what would you fill it with? both of you, please.
Yeah. I don't know. I now do work in the government space. It wasn't the first time I went to government. As I said before, I was the head of higher education at the beginning under Mandela. I set up the universities for 3 years, was it 3 years, from 1995 to 1998, before I left. And I left because we had finished the Higher Education Act. We had established institutional fora. We had established the Council for Higher Education. We had put things in place in preparation for higher education in a democratic new state. Well, let alone democracy or democratic. But just going back to universities, what we put together and thought would be the basis for a formidable sector in the democratic state, the most formidable sector. When I was at UCT, there were only 11,000 students altogether. Very few black students. In fact, one of the things I said to Charles Villavicencio, who was supervising my dissertation, because we fought about how long I was taking
Yeah.
to finish the dissertation. And he lost it with me once and locked me up in his office and said to me, Mosala, when I make a call to anybody and I say, Dr. Villavisons, you're here, the person on the other side says, Doctor, what can I do for you?
Yeah.
When you make a call and you say, Reverend Mosala here, the person on the other side says, Reverend what? So he said to me, this dissertation must be in February. I'm going to tell the faculty's committee on higher education studies that you will be submitting. At your rate, this dissertation will never get in. So that was the other head that an alternative to to Prof here, that I would have taken. I know I'm not quite on your question yet, but the point about it is that the world is coming into being all the time. It's not a finished product. And I suspect it's because the person who built it, who gave it to us, ain't containable himself. It's not finished. In the Old Testament, when the creation stories speak, except for the text that says, after 7 days, everything was finished. I'm very suspicious of that text. God had already been creating. The world was there. The firmaments were there. The creation, God was there with all that was there. So what I would put into the head, whichever one I get, and it's difficult now in the post-Pala days. It's very difficult. They're catching me too early after Pala. But I need a hermeneutic. I need a post-Pala hermeneutic. One Friday afternoon changed things immensely in this country. It's not possible that things are the same, are going to remain the same again. How they are going to look, I don't know. What I fear is that theologians and Christians, being what they are, they will still be doing the same things they were always doing. My plea is, please move with the change. In fact, don't move with it. Drive the change.
I'm still not sure if I've managed to get the question coherently in my mind, but I'm going to try. So I'm not sure the content of this book, but I was fascinated with the title, How to Lie with Statistics. Yeah. And I'm thinking about what you said about higher education and where you were in the planning, of higher education, and I'm thinking about where we are currently. And I'm thinking in particular about the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee. It's at the forefront of many committees that I'm sitting on in different spaces. And everyone's terrified. Institutions are terrified, different organizations are terrified of the questions that are coming from the PPC, right? And there's, on the one hand, I understand, because we know there are spaces that are not transformed and are stubborn in their lack of transformation. And then I think about the tyranny of statistics, if you like, with which bodies like the PPC are operating with. How many? How much? Count the heads, the foreigners, the, women, black, white, whatever. And I'm thinking what you said about the importance of the tools. In all of this, there's no space for tools.
Yeah.
There's no space
No,
for
no, that's right.
interpretation.
Yeah.
There's no space for those critical tools that we've got. And the minute you try, you're told you're too academic.
Yeah.
This is not an academic debate. This is about the bare, the numbers. It's about the numbers. And the numbers are left to interpret themselves.
Sure.
And we are stuck constantly with just this raw data. It's so raw. It says nothing at the end of the day. And so I'm wondering, for both Gerald and you, Prof. Mosala, shouldn't we also be thinking about extending our tools beyond the biblical text? Because it strikes me that the tools that are needed in our institutions, not just our churches, is hermeneutical tools. Nobody has it. There's such a lack of those critical skills that are needed to interpret that raw data, to tell us what's behind those numbers, to understand the complexity of that data, that it feels like all we're doing is using statistics to lie. And again, I say I don't know the content of the book and I'm dying to get my hands on it. But there's a tyranny.
Yeah, no, it's true.
That we're being held hostage with, a tyranny of statistics. And sorry, it's just I don't know what to say.
There's actually another book.
For skills.
There's actually another book with the exact, I can't say exact title. As fate would have it, I bought it around the same time, then, long time ago. It's called The Tyranny of Words. That one. Because data is actually numbers and words. It's both of those things, and both are very important. I don't want to take all the time, but absolutely, the other book I refuse to bring because I'm taking it to all the spaces. People will think it's the only book I'm reading. The reason that I'm taking it all everywhere is because I can't finish reading it. I read a little bit and I have to recover. And it's called, what is it called? People know, the one about, I'll tell you just now, I'll remember. But it has a small little paragraph, where it talks about missing holes. And one of the biggest issues, this talks to it differently. That's a very modern statistics book. It talks about missing holes, and this comes from the American planes that were being flown during the war back to base for service, and the military people had to check the numbers of holes on the aeroplanes and the positions of those holes, so that when repairs are being done or even new aeroplanes are taken back there, they must reinforce those particular areas. So a statistical analysis was required. And the head of statistics said, I can't work with this. It was a little spreadsheet, like of this size only, with the holes on the different locations on the plane. He says that there are missing holes here. And unless we know where the missing holes were on the planes, And people say, but how do you expect us to know where that was? You say, "Of course, you can't go on with the work, with the analysis, without the missing holes. So they say, but where would they have been? He says, I don't know, but wherever they are, it's critical because those are the holes that tells us where the planes are being hit out there. And they are in the missing planes. The missing holes are on the missing planes. Now, he does it with the whole book and with this issue of bias, inbuilt bias. That's about an inadequate reading.
Yeah.
That one is about there are people who should be here who are not here. There are people who are here who shouldn't be here. And there are holes with which we cannot complete the job because those holes we don't know where they are located. And that's what happens to Parliament. It happens to any form of investigation, analysis, interpretation, all of that. You have to ask that, okay, what's missing? Anybody gives you something, that's fine, I see this, but what's not here? Yeah. And if you go on and read, you at least know or no. I might have to search somewhere else. The truth, the whole truth is not here. This chapter here, I'm bound to find another part of the Bible that addresses the same issue. And if I remain here only, I'll miss out on the other things.
I'll now take only 2 questions, and after that, if Prof. Ramaswamy and Dr. Zwane can
Get ready.
each one take 2 minutes or 3 minutes, 5 minutes of their closing remarks and vote of thanks. So 2 questions. Yeah.
That's the other side.
Yeah.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Leonie Kamani. During this engagement, we've been talking a lot about marginalized groups. I would like to know exactly which marginalized groups have you been working with, and what has been your experience, and also ways of including them in the work that you do. What are the mechanisms that you've formalized, to attract them? Because we've been talking about being the voice of the voiceless. So it's very eminent that when you talk about marginalized groups that are also present within the spaces and also leading whatever discussions that are happening. And also, I'm not done.
Oh, not done.
Yeah, and then also the work that you do, because when you talk about how the Bible basically has been used as a weapon to discriminate certain communities. So what has been your work in that regard? To address the situation at hand, because also we're talking about the anti-gender movement right now, which is a threat to particularly women and also LGBTQIA+ communities. So what work have you been doing, and which institutions to address the matter at hand? Because our community is under attack at this moment in time, which is also impacting on a lot of laws, like for example the criminalization of homosexuality, especially in a lot of African continents. We've seen what has been happening in Uganda, Ghana, and a lot of other countries. So yeah, I had a lot of questions, but yeah, in the interest of time,
It sounds like one question. Which communities or which people or groups of the marginalized that they have worked with?
Yes.
Yeah. So, Prof. West, would you start, because especially some people that are not from KZN, UKZN, and which are not here, maybe are not, totally aware of what Ujama does in that way, and then we can take it to Prof. Mosala from there. So can you?
Thank you very much for the question. My response would be to tell a short story, and that is that the early, what is now called the Ujamaa Center, right, which didn't start off life like that, and contextual Bible study didn't start off like that. These names and designations came later. So we were working with the support of Black consciousness, contextual theology, the various forms of theological contestation that were taking place in the 1980s, right? And so the question was posed to us. We go to various organizations, and in those days you could throw a stone and hit 20 parachurch organizations. The place was full of them. But the Bible was remarkably absent. So there was lots of theology happening, Institute for Contextual Theology, lots of theology happening, but not a lot of people still came away confused about the Bible. So we were asked here those of us who were working with Itobleng Mosala's hermeneutics, whether there could be a way in which we could problematize the Bible around the issues confronting us. And of course, the issues confronting us were race, or what we referred to in those days as racial capitalism. Okay, so the early work of what is now the Ujamaa Center, many names later, was around issues of racial capitalism. Okay, now it's important to say that because the economic dimension has never been lost from our work, ever. And so racial capitalism became the focus for our work. But then we got summoned, and I'm going to use this word a few times, we got summoned by women to say, we were in your workshop on issues of race and capitalism. What about gender? So we said, well, who are you? We're an organized group of women. This was the Mthatha Women's Group in those days, in the early 90s. And they said, can you do a workshop for us on women? So we said, well, look, talk to your constituency, come up with some ideas, and they developed a program, 5 days of work. And so we began to then work with women's groups, right? And that grew. Ujamaa, what is now the Ujamaa Center, made sure we had a colleague, a woman colleague who was employed by us to focus on that work. And let me just say, this needs to be clear. Other than me, there are no white people in the Ujamaa Center. This is an organic black project that I am invited and summoned to be a part of all these years, which is a privilege. So having then started to work with women in all sorts of ways, women in leadership, women in the church, women and violence, all these areas, then we were invited by people living with HIV to say, well, we've sat in one of your workshops. What about us? Do we have the Bible is used against us all the time, but we don't, that's not the Bible we read. But we're beginning to doubt the Bible we read because all we hear is that's a punishment from God. HIV, the wages of sin is death, you see, all this stuff. So we said, yes, we don't quite know where we're going to go with this, but let's do it. And we started working with HIV. Out of our work with HIV, and I'm being more or less historical here, issues of masculinity. Women were saying to us, we test, our men don't test. Can you work with our men? And we said, well, you can't invite us on behalf of your men. But if there are organized groups of men who would like to do work on masculinities, plural, we'd love to work with them. And so that's how we started to work with men. And then out of that, we were invited by LGBTIQ plus community, an organized group here in Pietermaritzburg. The Utingo group said to us, what about working with us? And they were very deliberate. They said, we want a formal partnership with you. We're an organized group. We are intimidated by you guys, so we want a formal agreement that gives us some sort of power in the relationship. And so we ended up with a formal relationship with the University of KwaZulu-Natal and the group, and we have not stopped working with that group. Now, what's really important is we haven't stopped working in any of these areas. For us, and you heard it in the paper by Stembiso Zwane, we speak of intersecting or interlocking, we like that word, interlocking systems of oppression. The economic stuff hasn't gone away, okay? So we are, for us, even though we are many systems down the road, including now working with ecological systems, for example, we are intersecting and seeing the interlocking stuff all the time. So what we increasingly do is any one workshop deals with a number of interlocking systems, not one. So even though we get invited by a queer group to come and work with them, we'll be raising issues of how does your queerness affect your economic life, okay? And a lot of our work that we've done most recently is really about that intersection between economics and sexuality. So the marginalized groups summon us rather than us finding them, okay? So a good example of this is the ecological stuff, okay? Now we've always, because we are socially engaged intellectuals, we've been always conscious that the ecological stuff has to be dealt with. The communities have not invited us to work with them on ecological stuff until recently, the last couple of years. And we have a sister here who's working within Ujamaa. Is it Abongile, I think, is doing some work on the ecological stuff. So now suddenly there's energy from the communities around issues of ecology. But ecology must connect with gender, must connect with economics, must connect with sexuality. And for us, that's the challenge. And it would be one of the challenges I would put before all of you. One of the frightening things in our work is to see how certain systems become invisible. They just don't get seen. We were doing some workshops on land issues many years ago now, and we still focus on land. But we were doing these workshops, and we were looking at land and leadership, land and economics, land and race, and we included one on land and HIV, because it was in the middle of the pandemic. And you know, the activists working with us came back to us and said, we can't do this workshop on land and HIV. And we said, but why? And they said to us, because we agree with the community when they expel someone from their community land who's HIV positive. Because surely that's what the Bible says. Now, these are activists. They're activists on land, economics, gender, the whole shoot. But when it comes to HIV, they could not see the system that HIV is a site of struggle within, right? And so we had to do a lot of work with the young activists working in communities with the Ujamaa Center around the land and HIV. So the communities summon us, okay? That doesn't mean we don't have ideas of where we might go next, but the ideas of where we might go next don't determine which communities we work with. And we've become very militant on the idea, as I said earlier on, of organized communities. That there must be, you know, you often get people who just would like a workshop and they come to you and say, would Ujamaa do a workshop on this? And we say, but who are you? You know, who are your colleagues? Have you met? Are you meeting regularly? Do you have an agenda that you can bring to us of what you want from us? Okay. Now, our contribution is small. Ours is the recognition that in all these marginalized communities, the Bible is a problem for them. and they experience that. But they love the Bible, and they yearn for the Bible to be on their side rather than against them. But it's used over against them all the time. And they understand the contestation that is the Bible. And they've heard about us, and they've heard about our reputation of reading the Bible as a contested site. And so is the Bible a contested site in this area? Can you come and help us in this area? And we often get unexpected results. So we're not interested in people going back to church. They've been chased out of church by the Bible. Our focus is not getting them back into church. But many of them understand our work like that. So we'll have someone who is gay saying, I'm going back to church, and I'm going to dress like I want to dress, and if they chase me out, I'm going to say, let's sit down and have a Bible study. Do you know what I mean? They're empowered. We call it interpretive resilience and resistance. Okay. Now, our purpose is not that they go back to church. But for them, they want to go back to church. But they can't sit there week after week after week being bashed by this particular ideological view of the Bible. Sorry, does that make sense about the marginalized?
Yeah, and maybe on that note, if Professor Mosala can say something about the Bible studies used to do in the 80s, especially together with Professor Takatso.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is a bonus in answering the question of what has been done with the marginalized, with all these theories and methods. Yes. And after that, no further question. We'll take Prof. Lamatswane and
Yeah, I think language is also a problem, and maybe English is more of a problem, because even when we agree, but how we say things in English simply reinforces the things we are trying to reject. For example, I wouldn't say the Bible, I would say biblical text. Because that's really what we are talking about in a discussion and an analysis and debate like this. Of course, they are in the Bible. But as soon as you say the Bible, you are unifying. You are taking away, you are making all the different voices one voice. And that's a hermeneutical problem. But we are not the church in the 3rd century. We don't have the authority of the church that met in the 3rd century or whenever it was when the canonization of the scriptures happened. That belongs to the ruling classes. They have determined that whatever we may do, this will be called the Bible. It's up to us whether in practicalizing whatever it is that we want to practicalize in the Bible, that we are going to have a language that we use in order to, because there are contesting voices in the Bible, and there are suppressed voices in the text of the Bible. And that's why sometimes you get the two stories side by side. Yeah. The one was by one group. Your biggest problem is to determine which one is the suppressing one between the two. Because there's a reason why they didn't just simply throw away. Whoever they were, those people, just throw away the other thing and do this. And maybe in some places they have. You know, the missing holes theory holds. Yeah. Where there are clean texts that don't have a contesting voice on the same matter. You must be even more suspicious of those. It's better to have these ones that contradict one another side by side. But that you solve through, we all do different things in response to you. I don't work with communities enough to be able to say my black theology is located
What
in...
were you doing in the 80s in those Bible studies?
Well, those were Bible studies between two people.
Okay.
It was two academics who used to wake up at 5 and try to be at the university at 6, and to steal time to do Bible study before the others arrive. We were literally stealing time. And we were saying, there's no way people are not going to expect that we have the knowledge and the intellect and the tools, and we're going to solve things for them when we are actually having a problem.
Yeah.
You know, we had a problem statement between the two of us. Also, because he was a systematic theologian, and I was a biblical scholar, he wrote a book from his dissertation also called The Cross Bearers, the Crucified Amongst the Cross Bearers. And that's addressing a completely different thing. And it's taken me years. And recently I finally plucked courage to say to him, just tell me, what is this crucified? What is this stuff about the crucified among the cross bearers? I enjoy the book when I read it, but what's the stuff outside the book? So we are in that discussion now. And by the way, I should tell you, he was in hospital the whole week last week. I hope that it was just something going away. But in those Bible studies, we decided we're not using any other book to help us read the Bible. We're going to take it raw. We're going to use whatever is with us, or whatever experience is embodied in who we are, whatever ideas are already here. We're going to get those ideas to get into contestation with the biblical text. So every morning for 2 years at 6 in the morning, we did a raw Bible study. We allowed the independent voices, different contesting voices, to speak to us, and we spoke back.
Yeah.
There's somewhere where we translated, and I can't remember that thing because he found it once I had left. Once I was in Cape Town, he wrote me a letter to tell me he found something that addresses the question that we had been wondering about. We were quite unhappy about the resurrection.
Yeah.
We were struggling with the resurrection, and we were saying, you know, the Bible is big. And this resurrection story occupies just a few parts in the thing, but it's so dominant in theology.
Yeah. Yeah.
So many people will kill for the resurrection, you know. And and we don't have the authority to oust it from the biblical text. So I promised him that as a biblical scholar, I'll try and dig deeper using the original languages into the texts that speak about. And I had no basis for translating the text as resurrection. No basis. It was clear this thing was talking about the insurrection.
Yeah.
Now that may have been my black consciousness idea invading the Bible, but so be it. So be it, because I need answers. You know, this thing is giving me an answer. There's a reason why people called it resurrection. But resurrection is the English word. It speaks about the arising, the uprising. You can use a whole lot of terminology around that thing. Same thing with Leviticus 25, you know, from which the word reconciliation that we are so strong about. I mean, there are lots of these texts where we talk about reconciliation the Pauline way. You know, it's love coming in and sorting things out between us. It is located centrally in Leviticus 24, on the land struggle. Leviticus 25 talks about the return of the land, the return of slaves from slavery, the whole lot of aspects of society. And you know, there are different attempts at interpreting that, but what you can't take away is that we're talking about slaves, we're talking about people's wives that have been taken away from them, we're talking about people's land. And that is a completely online connection with ideas of reconciliation. The reconciliation, I wish I would have supported Mandela, but I couldn't convince him that reconciliation in the Bible means revolution and repossession. You see, I must tell you the final thing, that Mandela, when him and I parted ways, because I was president when he came out of prison and he was appointed deputy president of the ANC at the time, and so the two of us worked through those first years of what, and we worked together and we agreed to hold hands, but we disagreed about what should be on the table. And I was asking for one thing and one thing only, the land. And not the land as a finished idea, the land as an agenda item at the discussions. And I could not get that. But I must tell you what he said to me, which I think applies beyond what we were discussing. He said to me, listen here, Mosala, you sound like my guys in the ANC. If I am to go by your approach, we will never reach the end. He says, you and I must hold hands. These South African people, they've got ideas, they are intelligent, they are formidable. What you and I must do is go alone to the future. Go and lock up the freedom there and leave it there, stored safely, and come back and listen to these people. We will never take them away, take them forward in the sort of discussions you want me to have with them. And when I said, no, I can't do that, I'll never get support from my movement, he says, bye-bye.
Sure.
We will meet one day. And we parted on that. I mean, of course, we worked together a lot. He brought me into government to do certain things. But his point was, you must make a choice at some point. And he made a choice, and I made a choice. Sometimes I think, look at where I'm still sitting. I should have gone with him. But sometimes when I listen to you people saying, we are still not free. I wish he was here to say to him, look at where we are both still sitting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Prof. Ramatson. Our supreme leader. Thanks.
Now, which one was my water?
That one.
This one.
Yeah. I think they can sit and then you close. Yeah.
Colleagues, wow, what a 2 days. And what a way to honor a colleague, a retired colleague, Professor Gerald West. We appreciate the work that you have done over the years, the contributions towards scholarship and towards our communities. We are honored to have gotten the time to reflect on your works. And we will continue even beyond this symposium to reflect on your work. You have left us resources to work with, and we will continue to draw from them, to engage with them as we shape our scholarship, as we shape also those who come after us. We appreciate the wealth of wisdom that you have given to us. Prof. Mosala, we also appreciate you, because when we started with this project as the Department of Biblical and Ancient Studies, you were there. And we continue with this project with you, in your presence, and we are honored that you have set aside the time to be here as we honor Professor Gerald West. We build on the work that you have laid for us. We wrestle with the text. It's a site of struggle. We struggle with it. Some of us who are still preachers in the church. We struggle with it as we preach. And sometimes when I go to preach, I cry, God, I'm not getting the revelation. Or it's coming too late. Because I am struggling with the text. And sometimes the things that I get, I wonder, is this preachable? Can I even say it in the church? We wrestle with this text. And we want our students to be armed with the necessary tools to deal with the text. And that is why, through this project, one of the things that we said we want to inculcate is that we get a sense of the importance of hermeneutics. How do we deal with the text? How do we interpret the text? And we believe that through this journey, we will be able to do that. So we appreciate you, Professor Mosala. We also appreciate all our participants, those who delivered the keynote, Professor Nadar, Professor Farisani. We really appreciate you. Now, we came here to this institution where Professor West was and you were here. And I'm not sure why we picked the two of you, but somewhere, somehow, fate told us these are the two. We could have gone with anyone, but there was no way we could go with anyone else, if not the two of you. And so we appreciate that when we called upon you, you are willing to come and set aside everything else that was there to be here. We appreciate your presence. And to all those who delivered papers, we really appreciate you, the time that you took to be here and to make your presentations. University of KwaZulu-Natal, the discipline of theology and religion, Ukolonentiko, Ujama Center, we appreciate that when we called upon you to say, can we join hands in having this symposium, you were willing to join hands with us so that we can have this symposium. Thank you very much. I'm also glad because we are not done with the symposium, the Mosala Symposium. Next year, we are going to the University of the Western Cape. That's where we are headed. So there, the Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice will be hosting us. So we are already set for 2027. We will communicate with you the dates as to when we are going to host this Mosala Symposium, and I am already excited about 2027. So please, when we call upon you, do set apart the time and come and join us for the 2027 symposium at UWC. And lastly, all our participants, we really appreciate that you took the time to come and be with us. It would not have been the symposium that it turned out to be if it was not of your presence. We appreciate all of you. When we move out, we request that for all our presenters and Professor Gerald West and Professor Mosala, that we will have a picture so that, yes, there should be evidence that indeed we had our second Mosala Symposium. Then we will have a second picture, which will include all our attendees as well. So we want to have that picture as well. So let's have that as soon as we are done here, and we can go out and have those pictures, then we can have our lunch. From my side, from the side of the Department of Biblical and Ancient Studies, we really appreciate your presence. Thank you.
Thank you. Supreme Leader. My man.
Just one moment. You must warn this woman how the network is using. Otherwise, the Americans will target
No, I must start getting bodyguards for this.